Hello, everyone. We'll be just waiting a minute or two as people are filtering in before we start our program for this evening. All right, we'll just be waiting maybe another minute before we start our webinar here. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar here tonight, which is titled Stop the U.S.-Israel-NATO War Drive on West Asia, Hands Off Palestine, Iran, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Qatar. My name is Janine Solanki. I'm a coordinating committee member of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, which is organizing today's webinar. And before I get started, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all from Vancouver, where I am, on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I know many of us are joining from across Canada, from other parts of the world, and if you are residing on Indigenous territories, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on the responsibility each of us have to Indigenous nations to recognize, respect, and support the historic and inalienable rights to Indigenous self-determination, especially as we're standing for self-determination of Palestine, for the Indigenous people of Palestine. I'll be posting some more information in the chat about the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network and how you can follow our activities and events, and if you're part of a peace or social justice group, how you can join the network. We are a network of over 55 organizations and groups across Canada and Quebec, and are made up of anti-war peace organizations, social justice organizations, climate justice groups, a really broad section of organizations that are coming together to coordinate and have united actions for peace and against war across Canada. So as I said, tonight's webinar is titled Stop the U.S.-Israel-NATO War Drive on West Asia, Hands Off Palestine, Iran, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Qatar. We have a really excellent lineup of speakers, which I'll get to in a moment. But I think when we organized this webinar or planned for this webinar, we did so understanding that the last 2 years of genocide, horrific genocide that we've seen in Gaza against Palestinians is not something that is limited to Israel, to Zionist Israel carrying out this a horrific genocide, but is, first of all, with the backing and support of the United States especially, but also Canada, and has of course been going on for far more than 2 years. We know that Palestine has been struggling for self-determination for over 100 years, and today, despite the horrific genocide, has remained steadfast in demanding their self-determination and liberation. And we wanted to use this opportunity of this webinar to step back and look at the wider picture, because for much more than 2 years, US imperialists have been trying to gain hegemony in West Asia through their bloody wars and occupations. We've seen this, of course, for more than 20 years with the war and occupation of Iraq, Afghanistan, with attacks and war against Syria, Yemen, and all in all, through all of this, continued threats, and as we've seen recently, we'll talk about war against Iran. So I think in discussing the context of this last 2 years of a genocide in Gaza, it's important to understand and have the opportunity to discuss that this is a wider struggle and something that is really important for the anti-war movement, to see this as a long-term struggle against war, occupation, military interventions against all of West Asia, coming not just from Zionist Israel, but from US imperialists and their backers, or their network of warmongers in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which we'll go into a little bit more, I think, through the speakers, but which NATO has been a very active part of this genocide in Gaza, funneling weapons into Israel from the very beginning. Before I open up to our speakers, I don't want to go on too long because I know we have a great panel of speakers. I do want to say when we organized this webinar, of course, we didn't know we'd be coming now to this new dynamic of a ceasefire. As we know, a very fragile ceasefire, a ceasefire that has already been violated several times, a ceasefire that is by no means the end to the struggle for Palestine, is really just a first step. But I would like to say that I believe this is a historic victory for Palestine, for Palestinians, and humanity, and a historic defeat for Zionist Israel. And I think shows that Palestinians' determination and Palestinians' resistance and steadfastness in struggling for liberation is something that Israel had to come to the table to deal with, that they were not able to break and will never be able to break, as now all of humanity really around the world, people are on the streets standing up for Palestine, and part of this massive movement for Palestine, as well as the people of Yemen, Lebanon, and Iran who have defended Palestine, even though that has meant facing attacks, which we'll talk about tonight. So I won't go any further. I'll open up to our speakers. We have 4 speakers today. Angelune de Lauriers, who is from Labor for Palestine in Hamilton. Rick Sterling, who is a journalist and member of the Syria Solidarity Movement. Mona Ghassami, who is the president of the Iranian Canadian Congress. And Robin Philpott, who is the publisher of Baraka Books in Montreal. All speakers from across Canada joining with us here for you all tonight. Our first speaker is Angelune de Lauriers, who is a public sector worker and labor activist. She's an active member of Labor for Palestine and Mamas for Palestine, and has been involved with supporting Syrian refugees since 2016. Her activism focuses on building working class solidarity from anti-racist foundations. So let's virtually welcome Angelune. Thank you.
Hi, well, thank you so much, Janine, and I feel very honored to be here, especially with this panel of wonderful people with great experience. I feel like maybe I don't belong with this group, but also I want to make the point that we don't all need to be authors or experts or scholars in these topics to be active in fighting against imperialism and colonization. Um, you mentioned that I am with Labor for Palestine and Mamas for Palestine, and Mamas for Palestine came together. Um, you know, as mothers, as a community, and like many of you whose hearts were shattered daily by the images, the horrific images coming out of Gaza, the empty bellies, the parents who lost children, children who lost their parents, and felt a sacred, righteous rage. And that propelled me to learn more and more about what is going on there and to really understand the nature of what we're up against. We see these bombs falling with the brands, sorry, I have a cat here, American and European companies. But it's not just one country or one government. It's a big system, an interconnected alliance of power, profit, and militarism that spans the globe. And the perfect encapsulation of that this morning in London, Ontario, a group of activists, about 100 activists, myself included, blocked the entrances at RBC Place in downtown London, where the Canada's Best Defense conference was happening, where weapons manufacturers, military representatives, and politicians, along with local companies who were showcasing their innovation and technology to sell. So basically, a sales floor for war crimes and genocide. We weren't able to completely shut down and cancel their conference, but we definitely ruined their morning and slowed things down. They ended up the attendees had to enter through the emergency exits, escorted by police. I found that, this conference showed that even though Canada is not a huge player when it comes to arms suppliers to Israel, that title goes to the United States, followed by the UK and Germany. But however, Canada's role is still essential. We manufacture parts that are essential to F-35s, the warplanes that drop 200-pound bombs on people. We also manufacture parts for drones. We manufacture technology, systems for targeting, all kinds of essential parts that would not, without them, they would not be able to conduct a war the way that they do. So, disrupting these kinds of conferences really shows who is complicit in these militaristic systems. And it was ironic and interesting to me at the same time that we were there protesting and the police arrived. They had a drone up to surveil and take pictures of us, as well as there was construction right in front of us and a big Caterpillar branded steamroller was rumbling over the ground, and you could feel the vibration where we were. And it reminded me of the Caterpillar branded bulldozers in Israel, the D9, which was designed specifically for Israel and built here in Canada. So, there are people here that are, and companies that are profiting off the suffering of people in Palestine, in Sudan, in Congo, in Yemen, and people here who are working in those factories that make those parts, and people who are selling technology. Even the Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade was there speaking this afternoon. So we are that conference floor was shared with companies like Lockheed Martin and Elbit Systems, those ones that are notorious for selling battle-tested weapons. Um, and battle-tested, as some of you may know, is a cold corporate term for being tested in Palestine. So they're able to sell these surveillance systems, these targeting systems, bombs that are tested on the homes and hospitals of a captive population in Gaza. So this is clear to us that this is not a distant problem. This isn't just a them problem over there across the ocean. That same surveillance technology that is used to police the open air prison of Gaza is used to monitor Indigenous land defenders right here on Turtle Island. It's the same system that's arming Israel also arms the RCMP. It's what guards pipelines. It's what militarizes our borders. It's one machine that's fueled here, as you can see, by having government officials. It's fueled by public money. It's driven by private greed and protected by politicians. So we see this playbook here when we have politicians of all levels of government, from municipal councillors proposing bylaws to restrict protests around places of worship, to the newest federal bill, C9, that's proposing to amend the criminal code to add a number of offenses related to hate that do nothing but criminalize dissent. What they're doing really is hiding their fascist objectives behind liberal ideas of safety. And who are they really protecting? And who are they protecting them from? They're framing us, the people who stand for justice, who stand against environmental destruction, against the oppression of Indigenous people, as the bad guys. And I wanted to bring in a quotation from the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, that the metaphor for Palestine is greater than the Palestine of reality. And of course, he's got a lot of poetic license. I think the Palestine of reality is quite great as well. But the idea of this one place that is showing us the seedy underbelly of so-called liberal democracies, this Canadian multiculturalism that really hides the racism and imperialism that our Indigenous brothers and sisters have been warning us about for decades. We are settlers on this land, and we owe it to Indigenous brothers and sisters that our liberation is bound up with theirs. We owe it to them to recognize that our liberation is bound up with theirs, and our liberation and their liberation is bound up with the liberation of Palestinians an ocean away. So, faced with all of this, what do we do when we see this system that is so vast and deeply entrenched? Well, one, we're not all going to be going to shut down arms conferences, but we do have power. There's more of us than there are of them. And we have power as community, and we have power as workers. I'm here speaking on behalf of Labor for Palestine as well. And we have a campaign going right now called Hot Cargo. This is part of a proud tradition in the labor movement, where hot cargo is the simple and powerful act of workers refusing to handle the goods related to oppression. It's how we can use our power on the job to show solidarity and disrupt injustice. We've seen this. This is the legacy of worker solidarity. There were longshore workers in St. John that refused to handle military cargo for the Iraq War. Postal workers refused to mail to apartheid South Africa. And it's happening right now. Over the last 2 years, we've seen Swedish dock workers blocking military cargo to Israel, Greek port workers turning away ammunition shipments, Italian workers in the port of Genoa, Spanish workers in Barcelona refusing to move hot cargo and calling for general strikes in solidarity with the flotillas attempting to break the siege on Gaza. And that's real solidarity. It's not just a hashtag. It's disrupting the machine, it's disrupting the system, refusing to handle hot cargo. It slows weapons production. It disrupts profits. And as part of Labor for Palestine, we are interpreting hot cargo in a very broad sense. So it doesn't just mean, actual shipments, cargo of weapons, but also programs, services. Some of you may have seen the um, episode of The Fifth Estate on CBC last week that talked about charitable organizations in Canada funneling money to Israel and to the military there. Well, last summer, when the Jewish National Fund lost its charitable status, the union representing the workers at the Canada Revenue Agency, PIPSI, put out a statement acknowledging, that this charity had been sending money and doing things that it wasn't supposed to be doing, sending money illegally to Israel. So we know that workers can speak up. They can talk about these programs and services across Canada. And this sends a message, from Europe to the factory floors of Ontario that we will not be complicit in genocide. We also urge unions to pass resolutions declaring Israeli goods and services hot cargo, to negotiate hot cargo clauses into our collective agreements, to coordinate and protest and refuse. And for all of us, whether we're in a union or not, our task right now is to build community, to speak out, even if we don't know all the details, even if our voices shake, to correct the narratives that blame oppressed people for their own suffering, to call out racism when we hear it, to commit to talking to a friend who might not know much about what's going on and raise awareness, as well as supporting groups on the ground financially or in any other way that we can. Don't be afraid to speak out about the right of occupied people to seek liberation. As I mentioned before, we don't need to be scholars to speak out against injustice. We just need to be courageous. We know we're on the right side of history because we stand with the people who are on the ground under the planes, dropping the bombs. We stand with the moms of Gaza. We stand with the children of Gaza. And as some of you may know, I love to quote James Baldwin. And so I'll leave you with this quotation and a call to action. The children are always ours, every single one of them, all over the globe. And I am beginning to suspect that whoever is incapable of recognizing this may be incapable of morality. So let us recognize this and act with courage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelune, and I really appreciate your use of poetry, both from Palestine to James Baldwin, and I think that's one of the very many things that we have to thank Palestinians for, is teaching us that throughout the most horrific of situations, Palestinians continue to show us what it is to live, what it is to love, what it is to practice art and culture. And as you said, I really think an important thing from your talk is pointing out that Palestine has really shone the light on all of our oppression, on all of our shared oppression, and the fact that we're living under governments where instead of, as they like to claim, instead of them upholding international law and human rights, it's people in the streets. And I will have to comment on your initial comment about having activists in webinars, because this webinar would be, I think, useless if it wasn't connected to action on the streets. We have had a very horrific, seeing what we've seen in Palestine. I think it's been a massive wake-up call, but it's also shown people, all sorts of people from around the world that we have a massive power, that we can fight back, that we can come together and change the world really to put oppressed and working people in a better position. So I'm happy to have you start us off from a very good framework of action and how we need to keep pushing that action forward from where we are right now in a ceasefire to the full liberation and self-determination of Palestine.
Mhm.
So thank you, and I'm going to go on to our next speaker, which is Rick Sterling. Rick Sterling is a dual Canadian-U.S. citizen raised in Vancouver. He attended Simon Fraser University and afterward went to the United States working with the Liberation Support Movement in solidarity with Southern African liberation movements. He spent the summer of 2007 in the Palestinian West Bank and has made 5 visits to Syria beginning in 2013. Rick has reported on and investigated many aspects of the imperial domination of West Asia, especially media disinformation. So I'll pass the virtual mic over to you, Rick. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Janine. It's very nice to be here at this program today and a wonderful first presentation about the terrific Palestine actions. I'd like to say comment especially about Palestine's neighbor, Syria. In some ways, Syria is considered the linchpin of what we call West Asia now, formerly known as the Middle East. And the situation there is, honestly, it's very grim. We hope that things will change, but right now it's very bad. Israel controls much of southern Syria, not just the Golan Heights and Mount Hermon, but into southern Syria. Turkey controls much of northern Syria. They have a self-appointed leader who comes from ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And they recently had a so-called election, but the public was not allowed to vote. There are 210 members of parliament there. 1/3 of them were directly appointed by the dictator Shura, and 2/3 of them were elected by appointed councils, that is, appointed by the Shura government. The Shura government is sectarian and does little or nothing to stop sectarian massacres. And the U.S. is pressuring Syria to be even more subservient to Israel before they lift the onerous Caesar sanctions. Some of the sanctions have been lifted. They were lifted by presidential order of Trump, but the extreme Caesar sanctions, which destroyed the Syrian economy, they have not been lifted, and it's a debate within Congress whether they will be. As a background, a lot of viewers will not know that Syria was a beautiful country. It was very independent. It was very self-reliant. It was semi-socialist. They had no foreign debt. They were self-sufficient in energy and largely in food. They had a good industrial sector in the city of Aleppo, which some consider the oldest city on earth. They had a vibrant tourist sector, and many experienced travelers said that Damascus was the most interesting and welcoming, inviting city that they had ever been to. Then what happened is it got on the chopping block. Now, Israel has wanted to overturn the Syrian government for a long time. In 1995, Benjamin Netanyahu wrote a book called Fighting Terrorism, where he outlined the plan to attack and overthrow every West Asian country which supported the Palestinian cause. And Syria was high on the list. The US and NATO didn't like Syria because it was semi-socialist and was allied with the Soviet Union and then Russia, and they also allied with Iran. Turkey didn't like Syria because Syria was secular. And increasingly under Erdogan, Turkey became Islamist and sectarian. So they and also because Erdogan would like to restore the Ottoman Empire and expand as much as he can. And then, of course, Israel didn't like Syria because they supported the Palestinian resistance. And that's why Netanyahu wrote that book, and it was followed up by a document called The Clean Break, which outlined the strategy of undermining and overthrowing all the neighboring countries which supported the Palestinian rights. So, in response to these real threats, Syria did become authoritarian. No doubt they made some errors, but the threat to their sovereignty was real. Israel is the master of assassinations, car bombs, and bribery and blackmail. And so there was a real threat to the nation. But there was a very high standard of living in Syria. One time when I was there, I remember talking with a fellow on the street, and he had been impoverished, and he was now selling a few things on a blanket on the sidewalk. And what he said to me was, "Syria used to be the best country on earth, and look at us now." And so this was after the war had been going on for many years. So what happened in response to the desire to overthrow the Syrian government was an unholy alliance of Turkey, Syria, the Gulf states, and the NATO allies, especially the U.S. and UK. They started supporting jihadists. They were allowing recruits from Western countries. Some of the viewers will recall the recruits from Calgary who went and fought with ISIS. So from around the world, foreign fighters as well as some indoctrinated Syrians were given weapons and started waging sabotage campaigns, suicide bombs, car bombs, suicide attacks, explosions, incredible explosions, resulting in now we think there's confirmed 70,000 dead in Gaza, of course, and the number is certainly much greater than that. But it's estimated that there are 300,000 to 400,000 Syrians who died in the conflict. And of course, many millions were forced to become refugees in the face of the turmoil, the war, and all the threats and the situation. But in any case, there was an unholy alliance that formed to overthrow the Syrian government. And when when Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011, then the armory from Libya was seized by the CIA and by the U.S., and those weapons were sent to Syria. This is all documented in a U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document that was revealed. So there were tens of thousands of foreign and Syrian fighters that went to Syria that terrorized the country. In 2015 alone, the U.S., through their plan, which was codenamed Timber Sycamore, their budget was $1 billion. And so that just gives you a sense of the size, the immense size of the campaign. That was part of a campaign including Qatar and including Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Israel. There's a famous video of Benjamin Netanyahu going bedside, comforting one of the jihadists who was injured, and he managed to escape to Israel, where he was comforted by the Israeli military and by Benjamin Netanyahu himself. In addition to the military onslaught, there was an immense information war. Some people say this is the greatest amount of information deception and public relations expense, of all time. It was certainly very, very huge, and it's very telling that it was really across the board. All of the NATO countries, including Canada, of course, were bought into this program. Now, the Canadian Intelligence Service looked the other way as the young men from Calgary were being indoctrinated and recruited and planning to go to Syria. This happened all over. There were, as you know, there were hundreds of Canadians who ended up going, but there were 10 or 20 more citizens from Belgium, from France, from Europe, and of course from the UK as well. So, and there was the information war was widespread and it was very successful. For example, the white helmets became they were supposed to be the good guys. They were the neutral Syrians who were just helping out and were doing rescue work. When in reality, it's very well documented. They were created by a UK MI6 officer. They were funded by the West, and when their leader came here, he campaigned at Congress for the U.S. and U.S. and NATO to enter the conflict directly. As well, there were an incredible number of false flag events. There was a famous one in August of 2013, which was a chemical weapons attack and a nerve gas attack. And supposedly the Syrian government was responsible for this. And there was a lot of pressure on Obama at the time to bomb Syria, to enter the war directly. He resisted that, but he signed off on Operation Sycamore, rather. 1 or 2 years later, Seymour Hersh documented the true story behind the Ghouta attack, and it was basically one faction of jihadists supported by Turkey, and specifically the Turkish intelligence agency, which was behind it, and the whole purpose was to drag the U.S. into the war, to induce them and to pressure them to enter the war directly. It's interesting. There's a new book has come out just in the last year by an inspector from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW. This is a person who was a technical expert. He wasn't politically inclined, and the book is not political in that sense, but it's a documentation of how the OPCW was manipulated by the West. And the book is called The Syria Scam, an insider look into chemical weapons, geopolitics, and the fog of war. So, in addition to the suicide bombings, the assaults, the military attacks, and the information war, there was the economic war. Increasingly, the U.S. determined that they could not defeat the Syrian army militarily. So they would destroy them economically, and that's when they escalated the economic war, and it culminated in what they called, very ironically, the Caesar Act, to protect Syrian civilians or something like that. But in any case, the Caesar Act effectively crippled the Syrian economy, destroyed what was left of it. They could no longer use the Syrian central bank, and on top of that, the U.S. was occupying eastern Syria and stealing the energy resources that were there. So you had the economic war, you had the information war, you had the actual physical war, and then so that 10 months ago, you had the collapse of the Syrian government. They were weakened because this war has been going on since 2011. They were weakened because their allies, Hezbollah, had been brutalized by Israel in Lebanon. There was the pager attack. There was the assassination of Syed Nasrallah. The Russians had been their allies. Russia was consumed with the conflict in Ukraine, and Iran is on its back heels as well. So Altogether, they were greatly weakened. And in the meantime, the jihadists who had been allowed to stay and to actually flourish in the Idlib province on the border of Turkey, they were getting trained in the use of military drones. They were getting they were thriving really. The West was giving all the access to them and impoverishing, starving the Syrian population, and so they were being prepared for the assault on Damascus, which occurred last December, December 2024. So that was the situation. Um, uh, who are the winners? Who are the losers here? The winners are at this stage, and of course, it's an evolving situation. Who knows what will happen? Hopefully, it'll be a Pyrrhic victory and will turn around. But at this point, Israel has taken territory. They've destroyed independent Syria. They've opened an air path to attack Iran. At the same time, Turkey has occupied northern Syria and is taking control of the economy. More and more products within Syria are coming from Turkey. And the U.S. is maintaining their base at El Temp and in eastern Syria, and they continue, I believe they continue to steal the oil. The losers here are the Syrian people who believed in an independent, sovereign Arab Syria, Palestine. Syria was a steadfast supporter of the Palestinian resistance, and as well Lebanon. Progressive Lebanon was very closely allied with Syria. So, what are the lessons? I think be very skeptical of Western claims. And I guess in summary, I would say that Israel is NATO's spearhead. They're constantly destabilizing and waging war on their neighbors. It's very ironic because in 1949, when Israel was admitted to the United Nations, they pledged to be a, quote, peace-loving nation. And of course, ever since then, they've been just the opposite. It's been 76 years of constant assassinations, provocations, and war. And so they are. I'm hopeful, as I'm sure we all are, that the suffering that has gone on in Gaza is going to end, and that the Palestinian people will be successful in overthrowing the occupation and apartheid Israel down the road. And the same is true of Syria. Hopefully, the sectarian jihadists, which now control Damascus. Hopefully, their day will come, and Syria will return to being an independent, progressive Arab nation. So I'll stop there, and we'll look forward to any questions later on if people would like to ask them.
Thank you very much, Rick. I know that was a lot of history to put in a very short time, and I appreciate you going through all of the many ways that the United States imperialists and their allies have been attacking both Syria and other countries in the region, not just militarily, but that economic and informational war that you mentioned. This is a very long history of U.S. imperialist actions against Syria and throughout the whole region, which of course factors into the attacks and occupation and genocide in Palestine and the war and continued threats against Iran. So with that, I'm going to go over to our next speaker, who will expand a bit further to talking about Iran specifically, which is Mona Ghassami, who is the president of the Iranian Canadian Congress, the ICC. And Mona has been key in researching and preparing many of the ICC's statements in defense of democratic human rights in Canada and in the context of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. So I'll pass it over to you. Thank you, Mona.
Thank you so much for having me, Janine, and everyone who helped organize the event and the other speakers. It's thanks to the hard work of like my like-minded organizers that were able to get our word out and call people to action. So I'll start by briefly describing the Iranian Canadian Congress. Basically, our mission is we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and non-religious organization established in 2007 to represent the interests of Iranian Canadians and encourage their participation in Canadian society. And we work through advocacy and education to meet these goals. Before I start, the Peace and Justice Network's June 28th statement, which was written on the occasion of an International Weekend of Action, does an excellent job of outlining some of the key historical and political facts around the current situation. And so I encourage folks to check that out. And I can also point to other resources later and maybe in the chat. So I'm not a lawyer, a historian, or a journalist. I'm an activist with training in social and cultural anthropology, whose medium is ethnography, which tends to focus on personal stories to get a view of the bigger picture. So I decided to frame my talk today by using my personal experience as a lens into the contemporary history of Iran and its relationship to imperialist powers. This won't be a complete picture, as that would be impossible in the time we have, nor will it be objective, as feminist anthropology also critiques the idea of scientific objectivity, but it will be one subjective lens on the picture. So I'm an Iranian Canadian living in Dojage, the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, since the age of 2. I was born in Iran a month after Ayatollah Khomeini passed away, 10 years after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and only 1 year after the end of the brutal 8 years war waged by Saddam Hussein and spurred on by the US against the newly formed Islamic Republic. I began developing a strong sense of social justice from an early age through the combined influence of being raised by parents who had lived through that extremely difficult period in our country's history, and also beginning to gain an interest in the evening news that followed my afternoon cartoons. I will never forget witnessing the images of the Palestinian man crouched against a wall, facing Israeli gunfire and trying to hide his young son behind him. The date of that event was September 30th, 2000. That boy, Mohammed Al-Dura, was 12 years old. Unfortunately, his father, Jamal's attempts to keep him safe were futile, and he was mortally wounded. I was 11 years old at the time. The imbalance and injustice were obvious to me. I knew about the illegal settlements. I knew that Iran did not recognize Israeli statehood. I had also seen the images of other Palestinian children, the Davids, who bravely threw rocks at the Israeli soldiers and their giant tanks that were the modern incarnation of Goliath. I knew then, and I know now, as evidenced by thousands more gut-wrenching images, that Israel kills children. I was 12 years old when 9/11 happened. I experienced firsthand the Islamophobia that came out from behind the mask of North American civil society in that period. I didn't have a word for it then, but I remember experiencing the manufacture of consent for the war on terror, first against Afghanistan and then against Iraq. And somehow it was always clear that Iran would be next. It took 24 years, but the US finally did strike Iranian soil last June in a cowardly and illegal bombing of nuclear energy infrastructure. I remember growing up, repeatedly hearing the words Iran and nuclear paired together on the news. My parents assured me that Iran did not have nuclear weapons. The supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, had forbidden it with a fatwa, a religious decree. A position some have argued recently should change in the pursuit of nuclear deterrence in the light of the events of last June. But the idea that Iran might one day build nuclear weapons always made Iran the bogeyman of Western media. I don't have the time to cover the details of Iran's nuclear program, their compliance with IAEA regulations, or the illegal US and Israeli cyber warfare attack dubbed Stuxnet, which damaged Iranian centrifuges in 2010 and was illegal under international law. But I will highlight the moment in 2015 when Iran, under the leadership of President Rouhani, came to an agreement with the Obama administration to reduce economic sanctions by allowing even more invasive nuclear inspections than that would normally be required by the IAEA. It was a moment of hope for many Iranians to open up the country and normalize the relationship with the US. That agreement was subsequently broken by Trump in his first term, who also had the audacity to assassinate Iran's General Qasem Soleimani on January 3rd, 2020, on Iraqi soil. This was how I came to know the Iranian Canadian Congress, as the organization was responsible for a major rally in my city in the wake of the assassination. Following the assassination, Iran was understandably on high alert for further military strikes, which tragically led to the downing of Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 by Iranian anti-aircraft missiles. Many Iranian Canadians were on that flight, and their families are still grieving and seeking accountability. And my heart goes out to each of them, as to lose a loved one in this way is unimaginable. The media in Canada, of course, in line with that in the US, twists these stories to align with their consent manufacturing machine. I had an appearance on Radio Canada, or the CBC, soon after the assassination of General Soleimani. They told me it was not a debate, but I was invited along with one other Iranian Canadian to get different opinions. I started by setting out the history of foreign intervention in Iran since the coup in 1953, backed up by British oil interests and the CIA, after Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized Iranian oil. I also talked about the economic sanctions, which included sanctions on basic medical supplies at the time, and how this was affecting regular people like my grandmother, who has since passed. I also spoke on how Soleimani was well loved in Iran and was a leader in the fight against ISIS. Now, that experience was very strange. The other guest, who I found out had been invited to the radio show many times, didn't seem interested in the reality on the ground, saying things like, he was not my general. And at least once, she slipped up with his name, calling him General Qasemi. His name is, of course, General Qasem Soleimani. My name is Qasemi. But after the downing of the passenger flight, I got another call from the radio station, and they asked me what I thought now, because I was allegedly very pro-regime in the prior interview. Now, I didn't have media training, so I was in shock. I couldn't find my words or the bravery to speak up about how what they were doing was absolutely junk journalism. I had simply stated facts, refusing to toe the line of the anti-Iran rhetoric that fuels the diplomatic isolation of Iran and the sanctions, which are a form of war, whose intention is to make the victims, everyday people, so desperate that they overthrow their own government. This was a very eye-opening experience for me. That same twisting and censoring continues to this day. In the weeks following the June attacks by Israel and the US against Iran, the ICC was very busy. One of my responsibilities as president was to respond to the media reaching out to us. Anytime I said anything of substance, it would be cut out. I was attempting to link the situation to the ongoing genocide in Palestine, consistent with ICC's position against violations of Canadians and Canadian organizations' right to protest and speak freely against the genocide. When I brought up Palestine in one interview, I was cut off and told, no, we only want to hear about what's going on between Israel and Iran. Of course, what is going on between Israel and Iran cannot be separated from what is going on in Palestine. Iran does not recognize Israeli statehood because Israel is a settler colonial state that is forcing Palestinians out of their homeland in any way possible. And Israel, correctly, views Iran as a threat to its colonial occupation and aggressive expansion in West Asia. Some of the other actions ICC took at the time included issuing a statement opposing the June 22nd US aggression on Iranian soil and the Canadian government's shameful response to it, organizing marches with social justice organizations across the country, such as the Palestinian Youth Movement in Toronto and Montreal, launching an Email Your MP campaign to oppose the war in Iran, signing a joint letter with 70 Iranian, Canadian, and civil society organizations to also oppose the war in Iran, and co-presenting a webinar with Just Peace to educate the public, similar to this one. In that webinar, several experts spoke more deeply than I have here on the legal context, the political context of the US drive toward hegemony in West Asia, and the escalations against Iran that took place in June. And that video is also available on YouTube if you're curious. Right now, one of our campaigns intends to address the processing delays for Iranian PR applicants. Due in no small part to the crippling Western sanctions, some Iranians come here as students or on work visas with the hope of establishing a new life here in Canada. But since Stephen Harper's government broke off all diplomatic relations with Iran in 2012, Iranian Canadians have no embassy in Canada nor Iran to go to for consular services. Because of the hardship this causes for Iranian Canadians and their kin, seeing the government of Canada restore diplomatic relations with Iran is a key goal for the ICC. And one of the recent escalations by Canada was declaring the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, as a terrorist entity. In Iran, military service is obligatory for men, so this policy has the potential to impact a lot of people. And we don't know if the delay in background checks for permanent residency is due to this factor, or it could just be general hostility towards Iran. So that's why ICC opposes this policy. In 2023, ICC also participated in Canada's public inquiry into foreign interference as one of few dissenting community voices, like Chinese Canadian organizations, rightfully fighting xenophobia and a modern Red Scare. And as you can imagine, this is extremely difficult work because we often find ourselves going against the grain of the dominant narratives that are pushed by the warmongers that have financial and media backing. ICC is an entirely volunteer-based organization. The vast majority of our modest budget is from membership fees and some donations, and I do mean modest. Our financial statements are all available on our website if you wish to see for yourself. Occasionally, we're able to apply to some Canadian grants for a project, but truly this organization would not be able to function without the dedication of many, many hours on the part of the members of the board of directors and those of our members who choose to actively participate through committees. So I wanted to encourage folks to follow us and support us in whatever way you can so that we can continue with our work and speaking truth to power. And I hope the story of my lived experience and the advocacy that stems from it shines a light into the multiple injustices faced by Iranian people living both in Canada and Iran and elsewhere abroad. I hope it encourages folks to think critically about the media narratives that paint Iranians as the anthropological other or as an oppressed people desperate to be saved from their government. Iranians are strong, proud, ambitious people, and while we do have our differences, we do not need saving, least of all by imperialism. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mona. I really appreciate you coming in and speaking on our webinar. I encourage people to check out the Iranian Canadian Congress. I linked it in the chat with the bio from Mona. And I think this really was such an important topic to have a speaker on if we're going to be talking about Palestinian fight for self-determination and this larger context of the entire region and US imperialism. We can't have that discussion without discussing Iran's long-term solidarity through many decades with Palestine, and really Iran's role as a country standing for sovereignty for Iran and for the whole region against US imperialism and standing as that influence of resisting US imperialism. So thank you very much, Mona, and I can also appreciate here too in Vancouver, and I think across the country and really around the world, we're all facing the fact that mainstream media is not covering our voices, is shaping a pro-Zionist narrative. So any opportunity like this webinar is really a chance for us to have our voices heard and amplified. I want to encourage people to share the Facebook link. I'll put it in the chat again for this webinar to make sure that it goes wider. We'll also be putting this on our YouTube channel, and I'll share the link to that too, so we can keep spreading these voices and spreading our analysis, since of course the mainstream media does not. I'm going to go to our next speaker, which is Robin Philpott. Robin is the publisher of Baraka Books in Montreal. He is an author and co-author of 7 books in French and English, including Rwanda and the New Scramble for Africa, From Tragedy to Useful Imperial Fiction, and A People's History of Quebec. So Robin will be our last speaker, rounding out our speakers panel before we open up into Q&A. So thank you, Robin.
Thank you. Bonjour, I'm speaking to you from Montreal, and I thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this webinar. Following the presentation by Angelune, she's concentrated on labor for Palestine, and it's absolutely imperative that people address workers in Canada and Quebec directly about these questions, because they are in a position to make a difference in what's going on. And Rick Sterling's description of Syria, wonderful, wonderful. And Mona, I was so glad to hear about you fighting them at Radio-Canada. I can just imagine what it's like, and I wish I'd been there. I'd watched that, because I've seen it happen very often, and the way you describe it is very helpful. I am publisher of Baraka Books, and we try and be on top of these issues. And I'm not going to do promotion, but just I do want you to know we have a book on Syria. No, this is Palestine, Syria, Anatomy of Regime Change, which just came out 2 weeks ago, by Jeremy Kuzmarov and Dan Kovalik, which is reference to some of the material that Rick talked about. We have a book called Raising Palestine, which is coming out and it's called Punishing Solidarity and Dissent in Canada. It's edited by Leila Marshy, who some of you might know, and it's coming out November 15. And so anyway, that's enough for promotion, but just to say that we want to be on top of these issues. We want to have address burning issues with powerful, useful information that you will not get if you're just following Le Devoir, or the Globe and Mail, and the Toronto Star. I was asked to try and summarize what is going on right now, what the US, NATO, Israel are trying to do in West Asia. And the best way, in my opinion, to understand is to see it like we're 1917. It's like 1917 when there was a British mandate and a French mandate. Now it's the American mandate. In 1917, the fall of 1970 up to December, Britain's Egyptian Expeditionary Force pushed across the Suez and pushed east and took Jerusalem. At the same time, the British pushed west from the Persian Gulf and took Baghdad. And the famous agent of British intelligence, Lawrence of Arabia, they called him, said this is the supreme moment of the war. Basically, Britain had achieved a situation where they controlled what was going on from the Mediterranean, from the Red Sea to the Persian Gulf. And that's what I think we're seeing being undertaken currently. Just a word or two. We had this power show going on in Egypt about a week ago, and all these so-called world leaders flocked there to be seen with Donald Trump, in which he announced a peace plan, one of the many peace plans that we've seen over the last 80 years, you could say, or for the Middle East, for Palestine, but it's also for the Levant area in general. It is an insult to our intelligence. It's in fact a betrayal of the very positions that many of the governments who were there, including the U.S. government, had previously taken. they recognize the aspirations of the Palestinian people for a state. They do not recognize the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to achieve an independent, create an independent state. They are all members of the UN. They all should know that these are rights and that they have to be respected, but none of them did. And as I have to remind us, is that Palestinians have a right to self-determination and the right to create a sovereign, independent nation. And it's for Palestinians and Palestinians alone to choose who will govern them. And it's up to Palestinians and them alone to determine how they are going to do it. So we're in a situation where they are being atomized, you could say, right now. That's the goal, is to talk about the people of Gaza and the people of the West Bank. They're trying to eliminate the word Palestine. And I know in our media, we realized that when we put together this book, Raising Palestine, that, of course, the word Palestine was banned at the CBC, if I'm not mistaken. So the question is, who is doing this and what are they trying to do? In my opinion, is that Israel is just the pit bull for a very powerful master. As with China, it's the US and not Taiwan who's deciding what is going to be done. The same thing with Ukraine. It is the US, it is Washington, and not Kiev who is deciding what to do. If they put an end to it, it'll be the US. If it keeps going, it'll be the US. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, there's a war going on there. And once again, it's not Paul Kagame of Kigali who is deciding what to do. It is Washington. And in the same sense, has never been so clear that Washington and the US they're 100% responsible for what's going on in Palestine. They call the shots. And it becomes, I mean, they will play the good cop and the bad cop, but it is that is not what is in fact is going on. And I think that to see that Israel is controlling US policy, and some people say Canadian policy, foreign policy, is running away from the obvious. And unfortunately, I think it has to do with a poor understanding of what imperialism is now. And I'm going to make another promotional book. It's called Imperialism as Rampant Today as in the Past, which came out on September 1st by Samuel Soule. And mon ami Pierre Jasmin, who's online, will know the book, will know the man and everything. It just came out as well. What he describes in that is that it's a new kind of imperialism. It's not like in the 1914, where you had rival imperial powers of sort of equal power, equal strength, equal reach, vying for domination, vying to, fighting against each other as rivals. Right now you have one superpower, maybe on the decline, that wants to remain in that position. It's got superpower, it's powerful, it's got military bases all over. But they have two aims. One is to prevent China from becoming a rival, getting ahead of it, and economically, and is to keep Russia down. And that is the way they think that they will be able to maintain their hegemony. It is not an imperialism. And what they do at that time is that they will, in order to maintain that control, they will provoke wars. They will use proxies, which is like the case of Syria. They will use, and it took them a long time, but they actually succeeded in it. They used proxies against Gaddafi. And they use proxies in the Democratic Republic of Congo And they will do it elsewhere as well, as they do it now in Ukraine. Coming back to the Baghdad, so that's why I'd say the situation is now, and it is not. It's extremely troubling in my opinion, because right now you would say the U.S. And after 1917, the British with their French allies, who they distrusted, but they did basically control, the whole Levant, right over to the Persian Gulf, and perhaps after. I'm not too sure about their dealings that time with Iran. Right now, the U.S., with its Turkish ally through NATO, goes all the way to the Caspian Sea, and with its Turkish links, which are part of, if I'm not mistaken, Erdogan's neo-Ottoman approach is that they would reach all the way over to Xinjiang in Western China. The goal is to encircle Russia, to challenge China in all of China's international relations, and to isolate Iran. And I think that's what the situation we have right now. They've succeeded in buying off the silence of most the Arab world, a large part of the Arab world. I mean, with the fall of Bashar al-Assad, that was really a terrible loss in the defense of Palestine, also in standing up to U.S. imperialism. There's one thing I would just like to conclude with, is that there's behind this is this concept of the Judeo-Christian civilization, which is an insidious concept, the Western Judeo-Christian civilization. It's very big in France, and there's some people here in Quebec who use it. It's widely used by Trump and other Republicans and other Democrats as well. It's like the rallying cry, and it's the thing is that the man who uses it the most, of course, is Netanyahu, and he said in France in June, he said, "We are part of European culture. Europe ends in Israel. Our victory is your victory. It is the victory of Judeo-Christian civilization." The thing about it is that there's some very good literature about it, which shows that the whole idea is a lie from A to Z. And it was Christians who decided we're going to co-opt the term Judeo in order to soothe our guilty conscience, the Christians' guilty conscience for the centuries of discrimination against Jews. It culminated in the genocide during the Second World War. And so they were the ones who said, well, we're going to start calling ourselves Judeo-Christian. And there's some very good scholars who point out that it's just Christians who've decided to do this. And when they start talking, they use the term Judeo-Christian, but their whole reference is to a new Christian West. And we see that very much in the Trump people, but not only the Trump people. And anybody who tries to challenge these ideas is poo-pooed, treated as somebody who's totally marginal. And some of the people point out, of course, that the idea there is to try and the only people it really appeals to among the Jewish population, from what I've read, are the real Zionists and evangelicals, but it hides the fact that for centuries Jews have lived better in Muslim countries than they did in Christian countries. So it's an expression that I think is one of the reasons that people have a hard time. It pits the so-called Western world, which is an imaginary world, against the rest of the world, particularly Muslims, but also the Chinese or the Russians. And so I think that's one of the sort of ideas that we have to challenge if we want to keep going forward. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Robin. I think your speech was an excellent way to round out our panel today. I definitely appreciate you helping us understand that this is really a long game of imperialism. And while we're out on the streets and protests, it's really crucial that we have this opportunity to understand what is really at play, and that this idea that the United States is answering to Israel is not the case. And really, as you correctly said, U.S. imperialists are calling the shots. I think many of us activists and organizers have seen that the lengths that U.S. Imperialists and other imperialist governments are willing to go to attack the human and democratic rights of us activists at home, because they really need to keep their foothold of Israel to dominate West Asia, to attack Iran, and in the long run to keep their footing above China and Russia. So we'll go into some questions and answers in just a moment. I believe we don't have any Q&As in the box right now, so I want to remind people, if you look to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button, and you can click there to put any questions that you have that we'll pose to our speakers. I did want to make a mention, as the title of our webinar today is Stop the U.S.-Israel NATO War Drive on West Asia. I want to quote an article from Tamara Lorentz, who is an activist and organizer and researcher, who has written an excellent article about NATO's support for Israel. And I'll rely on maybe Ken or Brendan to put the link for this article in the chat by Tamara Lorentz. But part of this article says, after Gallant's briefing to NATO last October, and that's 2023, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that, quote, Israel does not stand alone, end quote. Stoltenberg announced that the members of the alliance, NATO, would give Israel practical support, which meant more weapons and political cover. NATO allies, in particular the United States, United Kingdom, and Germany, are the primary weapons exporters to Israel. So just to, I wanted to add that to give us an understanding also of NATO as part of this strategy of imperialists to dominate West Asia, and using NATO to funnel in weapons to Israel, and also, as we've seen throughout the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, to divide up the division of labor between imperialist countries for their wars and occupations and military attacks. Mm-hmm. So I will go to any questions that are in the chat, if there's any in the next minute or two. Mm-hmm. If anyone would like to ask a question, of course, we welcome different points of view, and we would like to have a respectful discussion. I know our speakers had really a wide range of topics, and there was quite a large scope for today's webinar, but I thank our speakers for really helping us to cover all of that. Mm-hmm. All right,
Janine, could I make a comment?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just give a shout out to Robin and Baraka Books, and I'm looking forward to reading Dan and Jeremy's book on Syria. But I recently read the book that you published called Einstein on Israel and Zionism, which is excellent at showing how the great scientist, probably the greatest scientist of the 20th century, was would condemn Israel today He was always in favor of a binational state. He was never, he was always opposed to an independent Jewish state. So the book is a tremendous compilation of Einstein's writings on the subject of Zionism and Israel. So I think some people might find that very interesting to look at. I wrote a review of it that was published in a few places, but I did find that excellent. So good job, Robin.
Thanks, Rick. And I did put in the chat the links to all of the books that Robin mentioned throughout his talk, and I see that someone's also, Ken's put the article, the URL to Tamara Lawrence's article on Canada, Israel, and NATO. So we have a couple of questions now in the chat. So one is from Matthew Weber, directed to Rick, asking if Rick can speak more about the connection that exists between Israel and NATO and terrorist groups such as ISIS. I, like others, probably do often have suspected, especially as of late, that these groups have been funded by Israel and NATO to further geopolitical goals of U.S. empire. So if you'd like to go ahead with that, Rick, and
Yeah.
also if others of the other speakers want to weigh in also, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, well, a prominent Israeli leader early in the conflict was asked about whether they were concerned with the conflict in Syria, and he said if the choice was between Assad or the jihadists, he would prefer and Israel would prefer the jihadists because they could for various reasons, but predominantly they would much rather have a fractured Syria than one that they can manipulate and control and attack at will, as they have done. They've destroyed, by their own claims, they've destroyed 90% of the Syrian military resources. So, but from the start, they've been intent on overthrowing the Assad government, which was against Zionism, and actually it was U.S. leaders, including Hillary Clinton, that was pressuring Assad to come to peace with Israel and to drop the Golan Heights issue and also drop the support for the Palestinian resistance, and they never did, and that's why the war continued and escalated as it did.
Thank you, Rick. I have a few other questions in the chat, but do any of the other speakers want to address that before I move on to the other questions? Okay, I have a question from Niovi. How can we convince Canadians that we must change, as imperialism is tied to capitalism and many view us activists as fighting against our own interests? So open to any of our speakers. That's very much an activist how-to question.
I'm wondering what they mean by fighting against our own interests, like which interests specifically are they talking about? Or are we talking about Canadian interests?
I think that might be in reference to, yeah, what the government would refer to as Canadian interests and people's, public perception.
I've been thinking about this question a lot too before today. How do we organize with people to understand that we're all part of the working class, like we're not part of the ruling class, and the ruling class does not care what happens to us, so we have to take care of each other. I mentioned earlier about building community, and I think that is really how we fight back against this fascism that moves power to the top and away from people. We can take it back by building community.
Any other of our speakers want to address that question? I think there's another question in the chat. Okay, I'm going to read this question. I don't have a question necessarily about the topics, as this is a bit related to activism again, which is of course important. I don't have a question necessarily about the topics as much as how to get into doing more work in activism. I love these webinars and studying and learning about history and challenging imperialist narratives, and find myself fitting less and less into a society that remains neutral, unaffected by these issues. I'm neurodiverse, and I see how the oppression that affects one marginalized group affects most others as well. How did these brilliant speakers make a career and name for themselves in this work? Thanks.
Join your local groups. Yeah, I don't know, like if you're on social media, they'll be posting your local chapter of, various organizations like this one. Just show up to things, talk to people. Yeah.
Angela?
And oh,
go ahead. Yes.
I was going to say that this isn't my career. I have a full-time job that has nothing to do with this. So I'm definitely not getting paychecks from Hamas for showing up at protests. So it's really kind of been integrating activism into all kinds of things that I do. So even, kids' activities, incorporating symbol, just teaching them about other cultures. So I think you can build activism into any of your activities. You don't have to have a goal of being the best at or making a career of something. Like Mona said, just showing up and learning more, talking to people. It doesn't have to be blocking doors. There's lots you can do to be an activist in your community.
For sure. And I will put in the chat and bring people's attention to the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, as we have listed, I think over 55 groups across Canada on our website. And there's lots of ways that you can reach out to many different groups, as Mona and Angelune mentioned. And if your group is not part of the network and would like to join, I'll post again in the chat how you can join, how your organization can join the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. I've got a couple more questions in the chat, and so I'll read through a few of them. One is from Greg Gillis. How do we address our own politicians here who support, cover, lie, and continue to enable it has moved. Continue to enable Israel in its creation of chaos and violence in West Asia. Once again, our elections seemed rigged in the U.S. in favor of self-serving politicians who will not oppose Israeli Zionist violence. And that's to any of the panelists. And then a few other questions. One, it's unlikely the United Nations will reverse its terrible decision of creating a mono-ethnic supremacist apartheid state of Israel. So what can be done now besides don't make the same mistake again? And then a question more towards the ICC. What conditions do you think we have in Canada to pressure the government to restore diplomatic relations in Iran? So a few different questions there that I'll pose to our speakers.
I guess it's not clear what order the questions should be answered in, but I was trying to respond to the ICC one.
Yeah, whichever one you'd like. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was trying to respond to it in chat because I'm not very good at being put on the spot, and it's really making me think. The gears are grinding. But I think there needs to be, to start with, there needs to be more public awareness and pressure, and there needs to be a belief that there is this, that would be a good thing to restore diplomatic relations. Like more of the public needs to be on board with that. And I was thinking about the other question that was addressed by Angelune, and you talked about working class solidarity as a way of convincing people to that the activism is indeed in our interest. I was thinking about the question also in a different way, where if we're talking about Canadian interest, arguably, like I think that we all benefit from living in a world where we have, peaceful ties between countries. And, even I remember when we participated in the Foreign Interference Commission, there was a man who was there. I don't remember his name, but I remember that he was former military, and he was really advocating for having normalized relations with those countries that were being addressed in like Russia, China, Iran, and just even from the perspective of know your enemy, but also from the perspective of just exchange, education, and things like that. So that's another angle and way of looking at it, and I think that is also relevant to this question. So that's maybe a way to convince the people in power. And there also needs to be the Iranian population in Canada needs to also be more aligned. Unfortunately, I think we have some what people refer to as native informants, or people who want to side with the power. We are aware of like some of the politicians who are pro-war on Iran, and it's very ridiculous. But when we look at them, we see that they're often tied with think tanks that are they're paid to do this in many cases. So we need to actually one of the things that also I was thinking about and noticing as I was preparing for my presentation that I didn't end up talking about is the massive disinformation campaigns by Israel and the like, both on the social media side and in convincing, or showing that there is support, for instance, for the son of the former Shah, or that Iranians should support Israel. And I think we need to educate ourselves and see that where these voices are coming from, and figure out, what are actually our benefits. So it comes through education, I think. I feel like I took a lot of time there, so.
Thank you, Mona. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Rick or Robin or Angelune? Yeah, Robin, go ahead.
No, the question about our own elected people, MPs, people in Quebec's National Assembly. This is a long-term. Some of the older people who are speaking here and attending know that this is, we've been fighting on Palestine, I personally, since the 70s. And we made big gains at certain points, particularly in Quebec. We had the PLO invited to the convention of the Parti Québécois in 1981. It was invited by René Lévesque. You had leading, political people trade unionists backing it. There are curves, the imperialists will throw a curveball and people miss it. So sometimes you fall back. But and people who have spoken up have been hit hard in Canada. But here in Canada, just an example, Montreal, Toronto, elsewhere, there have been huge demonstrations. People who were pro-Zionist are changing their points of view. I mean, there are a lot of people who have. So there has been tremendous progress on it. And I think what happens is you have the ruling classes and in Canada and other countries, they're just hunkering down to hold the line because they have to make little movements to keep the people off their backs, because they are getting attacked for what's going on. So there was one woman asked, what can we do? The best thing is to be contagious, and not to give up, because it is easy to give up because you don't have immediate changes. But when the world is changing so quickly now, it is a time to keep your eye on the ball, to know where we're going, and where is this problem coming from? But I mean, it's a long-term involvement,
That is an excellent point. There are a couple of more questions, so I'm going to read through them all, through a few of the last ones, and then we will wrap up discussion and give all of our speakers a chance to respond to the last questions and anything else they'd like to wrap up with. And I think there's a lot of questions and comments in the chat. I think this has been a really excellent discussion and webinar, and brought up even more questions. So there's a few questions related to organizing again. So from Aniqua, with respect to our grassroots organizations, what direction do you suppose we will take organically? Do you see us further organizing politically or socially? Do you propose we raise capital that will help amplify our voices? Even the most pro-Palestinian or pro-Indigenous voices will end up towing their party lines once in government. Where do you propose we focus our efforts in order to gain the greatest results? And then on another note from Morgan, I no longer support resistance, having formerly supported PLFP. Fatah and the PLO were the original resistance. The Palestinians do have the national right to resist, which is a true fact of the UN Charter. I don't think anyone can deny it, but I'm wondering if people should be practical with existing circumstances to improve the region rather than idealistic or utopian narratives about resistance or the region. Especially from the West, it's even less practical. So I think those two are more on the line of what we can do or what we should do. And then another question more on what we can do or should do from Yolande. With new laws being enacted to prevent freedom of speech and assembly protest, how can we organize rapidly for peace and against militarism and war? Recent Draw the Line events saw 20,000 people gather across Canada, but in Australia and UK, they draw crowds in the hundreds of thousands. Do you have suggestions on how we can galvanize broader support for the anti-imperialist narrative and misinformation in Canada? So I think, yeah, last three questions for our speakers, all basically focused on what we as activists and organizers can do. So whoever of our speakers would like to go first, and any closing comments you want to add also, you can go ahead.
Well, I'll comment. Or Angelune, why don't you go first?
Sure, I was just going to say I also noticed a comment in the chat about activists going to picket lines and showing support. And I think that's really spot on. It's that if you want to get support for your cause, you should show support for the other cause. And I think that way we will build a really strong movement across the working classes.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
I would comment, I think two areas to focus on are one, education, and two, action. And so I think it's always useful to provide new information to people. I know that's something that we focus on here. We try to have Palestinian speakers, anti-Zionist Israeli speakers all the time. And then, education without, if it doesn't lead to anything, it's nice to educate people, but it's obviously important to get them to do something, harness that education so it can do the action, as Angelune was especially talking about. Where to focus? I think youth, and I'm very glad to see that Robin and I are the older generation here, but it's the younger generation really that's going to turn the tide, and that is the hope of the future. And I think, of course, it's wonderful to read books, but other people are being educated through social media, and I think that's great too. Regarding the right to resist and whether to support the Palestinian resistance, I believe that the nature of Zionist Israel is really, it's been there from the start as a supremacist, as a supremacist idea, but it's really emerged. It's come in full force now, and it's undeniable, and it's for all the world to see that what that ultimately leads to is if people don't give up their rights, if they don't submit, it leads to genocide. And so I think it's incumbent on progressives all over the world to support them, support their right to resist, and to support the Samud, the resilience of Palestinians, and for us to be resilient as well, and to keep going even when it's the going is tough. So those are a few thoughts.
Mona or Robin, would either of you like to respond or add any closing comments?
I would simply thank the speakers and the attendees as well, once again, for having a lively discussion and sharing all the resources in the chats as well. And thank you for hosting.
Thank you, Mona. Robin?
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank the organizers for holding this and for not giving up. And, like that is very, very important. And that when things are slower, you can count on a certain number of people to keep it going. And that's how I could define, I think we define the people who have organized this. Somebody was asking about the Jews in Muslim countries. I put it in the chat on this question of Judeo-Christian civilization, and I think it is part of the ideology, which I don't know whether we've challenged enough. We haven't challenged enough because people do that. And then there's one other question that what do we do? We have to make it in such a way that our elected people do not want to be seen with stone Zionists. And like, in other words, it has to be, if I'm not mistaken, when they did that Trump show in Egypt, some of them didn't succeed in not having Netanyahu there, and he wanted to be there. Now, that's just, it may just be gossip, but that is some of the ways that you have to make our elected people feel that they're really on the wrong track. And we have a number in Quebec here, whereas the Quebec government used to be ahead of everybody on the question of Palestine. This current government is miles behind the open office. So what some of us are trying to do in different articles and writing about it is to make them realize how far they are away from the traditional position here. So anyway, thank you very much for inviting us and for attending and listening to us.
Thank you to all of the speakers. I think I've had quite a few comments in the chat commenting on how this is really such an excellent panel. We pulled together many different topics, but I think brought this big picture together, covered many different topics in a way that I think we're able to put together in, as Robin was saying, Robin or Rick was saying, going from education then to action and making that connection, because really there are many fronts to this struggle. As in one of the comments, resistance is a front, but our front here in Canada, in North America, in imperialist countries, is really to build that mass movement, to bring people together on the streets. And something that the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network does is unites many different groups with many different opinions and coming from many different backgrounds into a united front that we find what we agree on and work together on building actions, events, and webinars like today. So I encourage people to find out more about the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. I'll put one last bit of information for the network in the chat. If you would like to follow us, get on our announcement list, follow us on social media, check our website. We will continue having webinars like this, coordinating days of action across the country, releasing statements, and hopefully having also more in-person events. Last year we had a conference, a counter summit to Canada's hosting of a NATO parliamentary session in Montreal. And so we hope to invite people to join more events like that too. So a big thank you to all our speakers and everyone who took time to join tonight. This will be on YouTube and is already live streamed on Facebook, so you can share it there too. Have a great night, everyone.
Mm-hmm.